Mr. Chairman, you can start.
Okay, I would like to reconvene this third meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all present, as well as the viewing and listening audience to this particular meeting. I would like to advise that this meeting is being broadcast live on Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Let me extend a very warm welcome to the officials of the following entities: the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Ministry of Public Utilities, and the Water and Sewerage Authority. And we'll take your introductions a bit later on. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Derup Tima, and I'm chairman of this Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure. And I would like to ask each member of this committee if you can please introduce yourselves. You would have to unmute, introduce yourself, and then mute back again. So maybe we can start with Mr. Roberts.
Anil Roberts, Opposition Senator.
Yeah, any member can go in any order, please.
Mr. Morris Julian, Member of Parliament for Dabadi Wamara.
Good afternoon, Saddam Hussein, Member of Parliament for Barataria San Juan.
We have with us also Member Kennedy Richards, who would be joining us by phone, so would be a bit intermittent. And also belonging to this committee, we have excuses from Mr. Franklin Kang, who is not able to attend, Mr. Simon De Nobrega, MP, who is also not present. So I would just like to give the mandate of this particular committee to the viewing audience and those present. The Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure has the mandate to consider and report on the areas of land, agriculture, marine resources, housing, public utilities, transport, and works. And this particular inquiry, our topic, is the purpose of this meeting is to continue the inquiry into the measures for ensuring water security in Trinidad and Tobago. This inquiry was started during the life of the last Parliament, and the committee decided that we would continue with this particular inquiry due to its exceeding its extreme importance to the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So the inquiry is to continue the inquiry into measures for ensuring water security in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would just like to brief everyone on the objectives of this particular inquiry. We have three major objectives. First one is to examine the current strategies for ensuring water security and the effectiveness of these strategies. Two, to determine the measures required for improving water security. And three, to determine the challenges with ensuring water security in Trinidad and Tobago. So at this stage, I would like to ask the members of the respective entities to please, if you can please introduce yourself. And then after the introduction, I would invite opening remarks from each of the entities present here today. So we probably take it in an order, seeing that we can't signal to each other and all those things readily. I would ask the representatives from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government to introduce themselves, after which representatives of the Ministry of Planning and Development, following Ministry of Planning and Development, would have representatives from the Ministry of Public Utilities, and then representatives from the Water and Sewerage Authority. Just to briefly introduce yourselves. So we'd start with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of this August committee. My name is Raymond Seapole, the Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And with me is Mr. Jerry David, the Senior Disaster Management Coordinator. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Joanne Diorad. I'm the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Planning and Development. And with me are two representatives, one Ms. Camille Bouchard, Assistant Director, Town and Country Planning Division, and Mr. Kishan Kumar Singh, Head of the Multilateral Environment Agreements Unit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members, colleagues. I am Nicolette Duke, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Beverly Khan, Deputy PS, Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Kenneth Kerr, Acting Chief Climatologist at the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, Ministry of Public Utilities.
Okay, thank you. Wasa.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members and colleagues and counterparts from the other entities. My name is Alan King. I'm the Acting Chief Executive Officer at the Water and Sewerage Authority. And with me, we have Denise Leasing Pereira, the Director of Programs and Change Management, and Shirley Shepherd, the Director of Operations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much and welcome once again. As we begin our session with questions and answers, I would just like to remind committee members and officials, if you could please direct your questions and concerns through the chair. And just a reminder again that once you're not speaking, that if your microphone can be kept on mute. At this point, I would like to open the floor to members of the committee to ask representatives any questions they may have. And I think what the members of the committee would prefer the approach is that we would try to deal with each entity one at a time. Because of the Zoom platform that we are on, cross-entity questions and all of those things might prove to be a bit difficult to coordinate using this forum. So we would try to focus our questions on the respective entities as much as we could. I'm sure there would be some cross-flow. It's inevitable, but we try to focus as much as possible on the entities. So first we would ask members to, if any questions, to direct to the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And maybe I can start off directed to the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Judging from the response that was submitted in response to the questions asked by the committee, maybe this particular ministry is not as directly involved with the issue of water security as the other entities present. But what I would like to ask in terms of particularly the water trucking service that the Ministry of Local Government is responsible for through its municipal corporations. In terms of any specific challenges that the ministry faces regarding the coordination and the effective execution of water trucking service.
Thank you, Chair. As members of the committee may be aware, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government provides oversight over the 14 municipal corporations. The thing about truck-borne water distribution, particularly in those corporations which are primarily rural in nature, there is the challenge of adequate funding to provide communities that are devoid of a pipe-borne water supply. As it relates to the aspect of coordination, what we have been told is that the relationship between these municipal corporations and the Water and Sewerage Authority in accessing water from pumping stations and hydrants, there's basically an effective and reliable coordination with WASA. As I would have indicated before, the real challenge is where those corporations are responsible for providing water for those communities in need, particularly during the dry season, and where they are unable to really fulfill the requirements to provide the required service according to the needs of these individuals. At other corporations where there's not such a great need, the relationship with the Water and Sewerage Authority is a good one. This has been communicated to the ministry. And these corporations are basically responsible for providing service for state and non-state organizations, schools, community centers. Also, they are responsible for providing water on construction projects, etc. But briefly to respond to your question, the issue of coordination, we at the ministry do not see it as a major challenge with the Water and Sewerage Authority in actually making water available for the truck-borne exercise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sipol. What I would like to ask is, in terms of the demand situation, what sort of proportions that you have to deal with in terms of regular supply of truck-borne waters to certain areas versus emergency situations in terms of water scarcity, particularly during the dry season? Do you find yourselves what sort of proportions of supply in such situations?
Mr. Chair, we would have conducted a survey among all 14 municipalities. I have the results of this survey where the total average truck-borne water supply on a daily basis amounted to, on average, 63,800 gallons per day. What we would have been informed about is that the actual required supply that was needed by these municipal corporations was more in tune of the 25.5 million gallons. right? This would be an annual supply. So this is basically the reality that exists out there based on current supply and required supply. We are also looking at overall number of households in the vicinity of 5,000.
Do you have a spread of over the corporations of those 5,000? You need not provide us with the answer now, but what the committee would like is probably if you could give us that breakdown in writing. Yeah, Mr. Sipol, we're not hearing you for some reason. Right. That's
yeah,
it.
that the information that you are seeking is available, and we will communicate it to you.
Okay. I would like to hand over to Member Roberts. Anna Roberts, he has a question. Member Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, forgive me because the volume is not very loud, but I heard you say that you believe that your relationship or communication with WASA is great. You see no problem, yet citizens in rural communities are suffering daily for water. You also gave us that a statistic there that you provide 63,800 gallons per day. Then you gave us a figure of 25.5 million gallons, and you said that is the annual requirement. So I would like to know, what is the deficit of truck-borne water in rural communities now, and why are there funding issues for water, which is so critical? And if there are funding issues and people are not getting water, how can you state that there appears to be no problem between Ministry of Rural Development and WASA? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question and for the observation, member. The relationship that I referred to with the Water and Sewerage Authority is really with the ability to access water at the pumping stations and the hydrants. As far as the quantum of water is concerned, that is required by the communities, that is a totally different issue. But I am making specific a specific remark as far as the access of water at the hydrants, based first of all on the water tenders that belong to the municipal corporations, as well as those contracted water tenders that usually function at corporations during the dry season. So it's really two different issues that we are speaking about here.
Well, yes, two different issues, but one problem. Rural communities are not getting access to water. I would like you to provide us with your solutions going forward so that we do not repeat the debacle of this year, where citizens were without water for sustained periods, some without water for about 3 months. You noted funding issues. I'm happy that you have access, but if you don't have sufficient trucks to get water to people, and WASA is not providing it in the taps, we are going to come around. Dry season is beginning all now in the next 2 weeks, and we will be suffering the citizens again. So please let me know, how are we solving? What are the funding issues? Who needs to get you funding? How much funding are you short? How many trucks to provide rural communities with water in this dry season? Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, and I agree with you. Your observation is noted. This is a cry that is coming from many municipal corporations, particularly those that are more rural in nature, that would have communities which are devoid of a pipeline water supply. We have also in our survey requested corporations to put a figure, a dollar value to the water that is required to adequately supply these areas. And we were told that it will cost somewhere in the vicinity of $11.6 million to do that. As this is something that has to be addressed by the agencies responsible for disbursing funding to the corporations.
So you are saying the paltry sum of $11.6 million is what is humbugging an entire 270,000 people in rural communities from getting water. Have you written to the relevant ministry of local government, the minister of finance? What have you done to ensure that this little 11.6 million, less than what we are renting buildings for in town, is made available to you to provide water to our people?
Okay, thank you, member. I just want to respond to your question and concern and indicate that these corporations would have included these requests on their draft estimates, right? And this is what the process is for the allocation of funds to the corporations to address line items such as truck-borne water distribution.
Okay, Member Roberts.
So, but bear with me, Chairman, because I understand the process, and I know that if we sit back and we do nothing, people are going to suffer once again. So a deputy permanent secretary in a ministry has seen an emergency, realizes there's a shortfall. They understand the system. How many extra communications, calls, texts, WhatsApp, emails have been made to the relevant authorities to get the money released so that these corporations can be standing by to provide our children, our people with water. Water is life. There is no more important resource. Please, I need to hear some answers. All I am hearing is prepare for disaster in the next month.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mr. Seapool. Mr. Seapool, I recently came out of local government, and when I left, there was a whole government approach, meaning that in the Rima Borough Corporation, our trucks would go to Chaguanas or San Fernando or to Point Fortin, wherever it was necessary. Each corporation was asked to purchase a water truck for various places and spaces. Has that been stopped? Is that still ongoing? Is that still being used?
Thanks for the question, member. The corporations are by and large independent bodies, and in preparing their draft estimates, both for recurrent services and for the PSIP, they reserve the right to acquire equipment under the respective line items. So corporations are they are able to acquire water tenders if they would place that as a priority, especially in their PSIP, their development program.
True, Chairman Timal, once more, Mr. Seapool, what I'm asking about, I know, for example, when the desal plant was down, the ABC truck was sent to, I think maybe it was Point Fortin or San Fernando, I can't remember exactly where, right? And basically wherever there's a shortfall, if then you need another truck, the rural government ministry would make sure that everybody heads in the same direction. Is that policy still continuing? I'm asking because I also remember they used water trucks from Shogunas, Tabakit, I think, with the dump fire that happened in Arima. So I'm just asking just to clarify, because as far as I know, most, if not all, regional corporations supposed to have a water truck.
Yeah, thank you, member, and you are correct. This all of government approach or all sectors approach actually is one of the options available at the ministry and with all the municipal corporations. However, this emphasis is placed more in emergency situations. If we are looking at truckborne water distribution, which is something that affects several corporations because of the needs that exist in communities. This type of operation really is not looked at as to address these needs that would arise almost every year, and particularly during the dry season. But yes, you are correct. In certain crisis and emergency situations, like the fire at the Point Fortin dump, for example, there is this all of government approach where the corporations will normally pool their resources to address issues like these.
Mr. C. Paul, I heard you say that corporations are independent. You would be well fully aware that independence is feigned unless resources are available. No corporation has their own resources sitting there. They need tranches, they need releases from the Treasury, from the Ministry of Finance, from the Ministry of Local Government. Why are these not forthcoming? Secondly, I heard the Honorable Minister talk about crisis, and you're describing a fire in a dump and so on. I believe that crisis occurred in the last 2 years with the so-called drought and the lack of WASA's ability to deliver water. There was a crisis across the country. People could not get water. So are you going to institute this brilliant plan that the minister is talking that is available to out fires in a dump? Has that been accessed and put on the ready for the upcoming dry season?
Thank you, member. I am not in a position to give you a ready response. However, I understand the tremendous concern that exists as it relates to citizens of this country not having, access to adequate water. Right. I also agree that there has to be a collaborative approach. I understand that priority and urgency have to be given to the subject, and unfortunately, it is beyond me to make any further statement on the matter. I trust that you will understand the position that I am in.
Permanent Secretary, Deputy Permanent Secretary, notwithstanding what you have just said in terms of the committee understanding the constraints and all of those things, but member Morris Julian mentioned about that measure that she recalls being in place, and if you could submit to the committee in writing, if you can look back at that measure. And you could advise the committee accordingly as to that overall measure in terms of treating with how it would get it into effect for the coming dry season. So, yeah, I'd like to invite Member Hussein to ask this question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To Mr. C. Paul. Mr. C. Paul, now the corporations would have the various trucks available to them, that they would provide water to the burgesses of the various regional corporations. Can you advise us, if you have the breakdown, how many trucks we have per corporation?
Thank you, member. From the information received early in 2020 from the corporations, there is a total of 23 water tenders existing at all 14 corporations. Would you like me to indicate each corporation individually?
Could probably submit the full breakdown in writing,
Sure.
but it's good that we know the total number of trucks we have, because when you have 23 trucks in 14 corporations, you can definitely see that there's a large deficiency in terms of the resources available to the corporations in order to provide truck-borne water. I can tell you in my constituency alone, we have a lot of problems for water supply in San Juan. It's very difficult to get truck-borne supply of water. The other thing is, if there's such a small number of water tenders available, when does the ministry take it upon themselves to retain contracted services to provide water in the event of a shortage?
Well, as I indicated before, the ministry really provides an oversight role. These corporations receive disbursements from the Ministry of Finance under the line item of truck-borne water distribution. So the ministry really does not have a role to play as far as the financial aspect is concerned, right? And these funds are utilized based on the decision of the respective councils.
If there's a need for contracted services, wouldn't the representation have to be made from the various regional corporations to the line ministry, so that funding can then be available to the corporation?
I would have mentioned earlier when your colleague would have inquired about the funding arrangement. Each corporation will prepare their draft estimates or their budgets to indicate what financial resources they will be requiring to carry out the mandate, or to fulfill the mandate of the corporation. And these documents are sent to the Ministry of Finance through the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Right, and these documents, or these budgeted requests are normally or will normally reflect the needs of the respective corporations.
But with all due respect, we went through every single line item in the budget from the Ministry of Local Government, corporation by corporation, during the Standing Finance Committee. And what was surprising is that we got an answer that whatever some of the corporations would have submitted, the budget division was the division that would have cut down most of the budget that a corporation would have asked for. There are even bigger cuts in terms of corporations across the board, I believe by $2 million. So when we hear that there's money is being allocated to the corporation, that really isn't in fact so. Because at the end of the day, one, what they had asked for is not what they got. And two, there's problems with releases. So is there a problem with getting releases from the Ministry of Finance to the corporations in order for them to acquire vehicles, trucks, or even to pay for water?
Thank you, member. I can only respond to your question in this way, that based on the current fiscal challenges being experienced across the board, we at the ministry, and I also understand at the municipal corporation level, are experiencing severe fiscal challenges. As far as whether anything can be done to address these challenges, I am not in a position to say.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mr. Sipol. I think based on the responses you have given to the members, there's some commonality in what you are saying. The challenges that you are experiencing with regards to funding, particularly for truck-borne water. But amongst all of it, I would repeat the request I made from you earlier on in terms of the outlining of the measures, especially where you pull support from different areas and all of those things. Those things to be taken into consideration, particularly with the coming dry season. And a plan be submitted to this committee for our consideration. Because remember, coming out of these this inquiry, the committee will be making recommendations as well in its findings, and that would help towards what the committee is mandated to do. I think we have spent a fair amount of time with this water trucking issue with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. I would just like to move across now to the Ministry of Planning and Development. And later on, if we need to come back to the Ministry of Rural Development, local government will do so. But the Ministry of Planning and Development, and if any members have any questions they would like to address to the Ministry of Planning and Development. Mr. Nigel De Freitas has joined us. I'd like to welcome him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have a question?
Yes, I do. To the Ministry of Planning and Development. Now, remember, in the 11th Parliament, before we ended, when we were doing this inquiry, I think it was the Ministry of Planning and Development that indicated they were doing sort of a report on rivers and waterways in Trinidad and Tobago, where they were. And it was in terms of trying to figure out exactly what would happen in relation to flooding and whatnot that may occur. I'm wondering where that report is now and how far they've gotten, because that particular report, which is of all of Trinidad and Tobago report in relation to watersheds and waterways, was being duplicated by several ministries at the time. But I think the Ministry of Planning and Development had gotten the furthest in relation to developing something so that we could begin to figure out distribution of water in Trinidad and Tobago and how we could alleviate this problem of water. Some places not getting water and other places having water.
Yes, good afternoon, member, and thank you for the question. Yes, since the last meeting of this committee, the Ministry of Planning did, in fact, host one meeting so far with several of the entities with responsibility for water. That would have been Ministry of Public Utilities, local government was also present, BASA was also present, Met Office and some of the other entities to discuss exactly that you were referenced here, which would be as it relates to all the different studies or the different initiatives that have been going on. So the year has been a challenging one for us, as you are fully aware, but we have been following up and trying to keep that sort of integrated approach to the way that we want to see the development of the water and water security for Trinidad and Tobago. So while we may have only had one meeting, even when we were forming the public sector investment program, we were looking at the synergies that have to be created to ensure that the financing and the project development would in fact meet some of those requirements. So the work still continues, and I'm hoping that next year we will be able to meet more regularly to discuss some of the initiatives.
Okay, Mr. Chair, and just to respond to that, because I came in, and sorry for being late, but I came in when we were talking about the water tenders and water trucking from a local government standpoint. But in my mindset, something like that was always indicated or for really emergency situations. And that could only be a short-term measure, because I cannot see that we go on into the future 25, 30, 40 years using water trucks as a main source to get water to people. Obviously, the pipe needs to be upgraded, and we need to get information in terms of where our water sources are and how best we can utilize that distribution once we have the report to get water to people. So I just wanted to indicate and throw in my 2 cents there in relation to the water tenders. That has to be a short-term measure. And obviously, there's a mid-term measure and a long-term measure. And going forward in this meeting, I would love to hear where we are at in that. I've heard all about the pipes that need to be replaced. I've heard all about the leakages in the system. But obviously, we have to have a plan going forward, because I cannot see 50 years from now, we're still dependent on water trucks to deliver water to people.
Yeah, I think, Member De Freitas, you came in a bit late, because earlier on in the discussion with the ministry, I think we were trying to find out, what proportion of water is just to ensure that citizens get a regular supply from water trucking, or how much of it is ready for emergency purposes. And I think Mr. Sipol would send some information to the committee in writing regarding that matter. I know, Member Roberts, you had a question for the Ministry of Local Government on the water trucking, but I would prefer we come back to that in the second rounds of questions that we take up after, when we come back to the ministry, okay? Member Saddam Hussein, you had a question for the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. To the PS, Mr. Chairman, now I know that Trinidad and Tobago has adopted the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, based on that has been outlined by the United Nations. And Goal 6 talks about clean water and sanitation. And Trinidad and Tobago will obviously had to do some level of assessment in terms of reporting back to the United Nations on where we are with respect to attaining these goals by 2030. Can you, PS, indicate to us how far along we are in terms of clean water supply to Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of whether or not you have a percentage of the number of persons who receive clean water supply?
PS, you would have to.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had a little difficulty there. Yes, thank you, Member. I would like to be able to provide that in writing. We did prepare a report for our first voluntary report on the SDGs. And while we didn't report on all the goals, we do have information with respect to the potable water. And I would like to provide that in writing.
Permanent Secretary, in response to the questions that was asked by the committee, in particular question Roman 6, page 3 of your response, when a question was asked regarding any studies with regard to the impact of climate change on water security in Trinidad and Tobago, you did refer to a vulnerability and capacity assessment 2019 study that was conducted by the government of Trinidad and Tobago with support from the European Union. And you went on to mention 7 priority sectors regarding climate change. One was item 2, water resources. And you further went on to say that under the water resources sector, that the quality of the surface water is deteriorating in many locations, as evidenced by high levels of BOD, bacterial content, etc. I'm reading from your response. The main threats are uncontrolled point waste discharges, in particular from industries and domestic sources, as well as high level of erosion in upper reaches of the watercourses. And later down in your response, you mentioned that the communities within the Caroni River Basin, which comprises of 15 watersheds, and Southwest Tobago, were identified as the most vulnerable. From that time of this particular report, in terms of the Ministry of Planning and Development, what approach are you all taking? What particular initiatives are you all putting in place to address this? Well, the other aspects, but in particular this deterioration of the watersheds and quality of surface water.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The main response will be given by Mr. Kumar Singh, but I would also like to note that the way we try to finance and support under the public sector investment, we really try to deal with the things that come out of the reports so that we finance the mediation and adaptation strategies as they become available in terms of project format. But I'll ask Mr. Kumar Singh to answer in detail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I think it would be important to understand the context in which the response was given, and that is that the impacts of climate change is going to exacerbate or worsen the existing situation. And the existing situation is the level of contamination in the waterways. When you overlay climate change impacts on that, such as increasing temperatures, decreasing rainfall, higher evaporation rates, you're going to get more concentration of these contaminants rather. And therefore, the cost of water treatment is going to go up, obviously, because you have more pollution to deal with. So therefore, the adaptation measures or the approaches to reducing these risks would lie in the various agencies responsible for pollution control. Ministry of Planning, of course, is a parent agency, but we are currently now looking to engage the various agencies and ministries in integrating the findings of the report, because this requires a holistic approach. Because of the nexus between pollution and between water winning and water resources generally. So we are in the process right now of engaging stakeholders and developing, as the PS said, in terms of finance, developing a financial investment plan for rolling out the recommendations and the findings of this report in a holistic way, because of the various agencies and ministries that are required to take action to reduce the risks. One of the uncertainties, one of the challenges in dealing with climate change impacts in a small and developing states is how do you distill the impacts from the developmental impacts. And so some of the issues that we found in terms of upstream erosion, contamination from quarrying activities and so on, can only be differentiated from the climate change impacts only up to a point. So therefore, the approach that we are taking is to assess the climate risks, identify the intervention options to reduce those risks, and then re-evaluate them over time to revisit them. It's what is called the pathways approach. So it's an iterative process, and we've just begun to strategize on an action plan to roll out this VCA study, the Vulnerability Capacity Assessment Study, and as well develop a financing or financial investment plan for addressing some of the issues that have been identified therein. I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar Singh. Madam Permanent Secretary, is there a specific dedicated unit that is established within the Ministry of Planning and Development for this aspect, for the climate change aspect?
Yes, the Environment Policy and Planning Division, of which Mrs. Kumar Singh is a member, they deal with all environmental issues as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago. They are our lead department in that. And from that, it's both a combination of policy and securing financing and project execution for some of the areas associated with climate change. But of course, many of the other ministries are also lead in terms of executing some of the projects that are needed. Example, that Ministry of Agriculture, Public Utilities, etc.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question from me. In your response to the challenges regarding water security, which was question Roman 14, which you have on page 8 of your response. You one of the bullet items, you says achieving effective coordination among relevant government agencies and units. And I know I can't recall the exact year, but you all had commissioned consultants to look at the creation of a water management resources authority. It was done by Leong and Partners together with another foreign consultant. And subsequent to that, there was the integrated water resources management policy that was developed by the Ministry of Public Utilities. Bearing in mind all that work that has gone into it, do you still see the relevance of in order to establish clear and direct water sector policy for the country from the point of view of the Ministry of Planning and Development? Do you still see that as a necessity? And if so, the sense of urgency about it?
Yes, thank you for the questions, Mr. Chairman. Yes, integrated water management, and in this case, you are asking on ensuring water security. Our analysis would show that water security takes a number of forms. Yes, and it will be distribution in some instances. So you want to ensure that citizens enjoy a certain level of water availability, but also security also relates to climate change. It also relates to how we manage the other resources that will help us retain water, like forest cover. It also aims in terms of the maintenance of our non-revenue water supplies, etc. So an integrated approach would be a priority for us, as we have, as I said, the committee that we did have one meeting last year was specifically to look at that. How do we approach an integrated approach from a policy perspective as well as a programming perspective, so that we are able to deal with all the different aspects of water security, so that, yes, there are lead ministries like the Ministry of Public Utilities and WASA, which we will ensure that they are able to do what they have to do in terms of their priority mandates. And the Ministry of Planning will also be undertaking what we would call a monitoring and evaluation role to ensure that what we have set as targets and deliverables under the several projects and programs are in fact reaching the citizens as they are supposed to be taken care of under development initiatives. So yes, we advocate for an integrated approach, and we will, as I'd indicated, that hopefully 2021 will be a better year in terms of being able to get our initiatives off the ground and more integrated meetings and interaction on some of the priorities.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Member Roberts, you have a question for the Ministry of Planning and Development?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. First, one following from your question about water security. I'll ask the Permanent Secretary, with the integrated approach and analysis for our water security, was privatization discussed at any level? And if so, to what extent was privatization of our water supply or aspects thereof discussed?
Thank you, Member, for that question. No, I have no knowledge of any discussions on privatization. We looked at the projects as they relate to the projects being submitted by the ministries and WASA, and that has nothing to do with that policy initiative on privatization.
Thank you. And secondly, well, climate change is a forward-thinking process and very good, but as Bob Marley would say, that's way down our line right now because we have gone backwards. Because with WASA wasting 4 billion gallons of water per month, I think climate change is the least of our worries at this present moment. But you were speaking about planning and development, and we've heard in the last 6 years attacks on private citizens for building in water courses, affecting water courses, not receiving proper planning permission. But I have a report before me which shows that the biggest culprit who has done construction and development without planning approval from your ministry is in fact the state, the government, especially in their housing projects in Greenvale, Harmony Hall, Tarrandale, Taruba, St. Joseph, and so on. Does your analysis show that the government, the state itself, is shirking its responsibility to adhere to the laws and planning laws of Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you, Member, for the question. The development of projects under state lands would always come to the Town and Country Planning Division. We are actually part of the committee that would be for development of housing, etc. So the ministry's Town and Country Planning Division works very intimately with the developers, and we scrutinize all the proposals and the projects. So for the big development sites, as you were suggesting, Greenvale, Taruba, etc., Town and Country Planning would be part of the planning committee. We would do the requisite approvals. We would ensure that the plans and developers adhere to what is expected to be executed. So we are at the planning approval stage, not at the construction. So in our approval process, we ensure that all the plans are robust and can prevent any sort of negative impacts on the citizen. So that's our role in terms as a regulator, and we do that as a regulating agency. I don't know if Ms. Bouchard would like to add anything further at this point.
Permanent Secretary, thank you. However, I know that you're there at the approval, but I will only use 1 or 2 examples. In Greenvale, your ministry said, do not develop it. It's agricultural, it's floodplain, HDC. You are not given approval. They ignored the Ministry of Planning and went ahead. And we have a disaster zone 12 years later. What is your ministry doing to have more teeth to handle and control the very government of which you are part?
Before, Madam Permanent Secretary, before I answer a few, Member Roberts, I just would want to pull back the line of questioning in terms of planning with regards to water security, right? Now, I do acknowledge unplanned development would contribute to some extent to the question of flooding and flooding in particular, and that would have an impact on the water security. But I don't want to get us too sidetracked into getting into planning and approval processes and all of those things, which may be more appropriate to another inquiry that I'm sure would be coming up.
With all due respect, the climatologist had spoken about the quality of water, the fecal content, and so on, and leading to increased water treatment costs by building without planning permission in flood-prone areas on agricultural land and impacting in the water courses with human excrement and so on. That is part and parcel of our water security, and that is why the Ministry of Planning is so important. And if they tell the state, do not build there, then they must be able to have some authority to ensure that the state does not build there, because then we are left with this problem of water treatment costs going up and a poison supply.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the pollution and all of elements, because in addition to that, we have all the issue of agricultural runoffs and use of chemicals and all of these things, pollution of the water courses. But what I'm saying distinctly in terms of linking it, it is linked, but in terms of the role of the Ministry of Planning and Development, getting into the question of the approval process, particularly with state approvals and all those things. But I will still invite the Permanent Secretary to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said, I will ask Ms. Kushad to talk a bit about the process.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair, Senator members. The Town and Country Planning Division works very integrally hand in hand with the state agencies, including HCC, in terms of trying to get the planning permissions efficiently processed. Yes, I would agree that sometimes the state agencies may proceed to build development during our discourse or through the planning process. But in the case of, for example, you use Greenville, where there may have been construction prior to planning permission, the Town and Country Planning Division did meet with the relevant stakeholders or the regulatory bodies subsequently to try to implement mitigating efforts to any sort of situation that may have occurred negatively from the build development occurring without planning permission. But generally, the state unit at the Town and Country Planning Division interacts directly with most of the state agencies that come for planning permission for build development, and we try very hard to maintain a robust relationship that gets the planning permissions out prior to the construction. With regard to enforcement, generally, the state tries not to enforce on the other state units. We try to mitigate, we try to get the permissions out to assist with the agenda of the state bodies as best as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gishad. I am certain, though, that you would agree with me that it would be far better if the state would listen to experts like yourself and not go ahead on their own, so that mitigation will not be necessary. Wouldn't you prefer action or approve at the approval stage rather than mitigation?
Of course, yeah. In an ideal scenario, that is the optimal process.
Yeah, I think we will move on. We have spent quite some time on this aspect of the approval. And if we have no more questions for planning and Ministry of Planning and Development, thank you very much, Madam Secretary and Ms. Gishad, for your responses.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like for us to move on to the Water and Sewerage Authority. Member Hussein, you had some questions for the Water and Sewerage Authority.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So with respect to the submission that was made by WASA on the 15th of May, I just have some additional questions that I would like to ask. In that submission, it was indicated that there were about 243.2 kilometers of high leaking pipelines, and they were identified for replacement in the sum of $946 million over a period of 10 years. Can we get an update in terms of how many pipes have been replaced in terms of those that have been identified? And what was the cost?
Mr. Punking, are you there?
Yeah, I'll ask the Director of Program and Change Management, Ms. Denise Pereira. She'll respond on it.
Right. Right. So good afternoon. Sorry, let me just remove this. So good afternoon, Member, thank you for the question. And approximately out of that listing of 243 kilometers, approximately about 5 kilometers of pipeline would have been replaced. That is just out of that particular listing. We did have in terms of plans moving forward, where we had approached the ministry in terms of at least doing it in segments and phases, but in terms of moving forward, the challenge has been funding in terms of moving those pipelines and replacements forward.
Okay, and how much water I'm just focusing on it will now be about 238 kilometers now.
Mm-hmm.
How many, what account, in terms of volume of water, the leakages, how much water does this account for in terms of leakages?
I would have to quantify that. I'll have to work it out. That I can't say it off the top of my head. I will have to quantify it and respond at another time.
Generally now, based on WASA's assessment, how many gallons of water are wasted per day in terms of leakages?
Let me answer. I'll answer that one. So our unaccounted for water level is between 45 and 50%. It's an estimate. Based on our levels of production, we are currently producing between 230 and 240 million gallons daily. So the water that will be lost through unaccounted for water will be of the order between 100 and 110 million gallons of water.
On a daily basis. So that's about 50% of 50% of the water is lost through leakages.
Yeah, that's the estimate. Well, it's unaccounted for water, including leakages.
And this would be water coming out of all of the treatment plants, including the desal cut too?
Correct. That's from all sources.
All sources. And Mr. Poonking, if you can just give us...
Could you hold, please, Chairman? Could you ask Mr. Poonking to take off the mask? I'm not hearing a word.
Oh, well, if he's...
Sorry, I would love to hear what he's saying.
All right. Provided he's not...
Are you hearing
he's socially distanced from others in the room. Yeah.
Member, are you hearing me?
Much better, thank you.
Okay.
My other question goes in terms of rates and tariffs. Mr. Poonking, can you tell us the last time the RIC did an assessment in terms of rates and tariffs?
Well, what I can say is the last time we got an adjustment of the rate, and that was 1993.
I know the RIC is currently. I saw it in the pub 93 in the public that there is some review taking place now. Is that true?
Well, we do communicate with the RIC, and we have been communicating on an ongoing basis with respect to review of the tariff, and that is ongoing. So they will have their mandate, and I think that question will be better directed to them.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is under the RIC Act. Sorry?
No, go ahead, please, Member Hussain.
Under the RIC Act, the service provider, WASA, does have the power to ask the RIC where there's a change of circumstance to review the rates. So I just wanted to confirm that it was not WASA who was asking for the rates to be reviewed.
At this point in time, the issue of the rate review will be directed by policy. We have acknowledged that the current rate structure being dated 1993, that it is no longer applicable at this time and should be subject to review.
So can I then confirm it is the RIC who started the rate review process and it was not initiated by WASA?
There's a process to follow, and we have been and will continue to work with the RIC with respect to providing them the information that they require for their assessment in keeping with the process that is approved.
Well, there are two ways in which the rates can be reviewed. one, every 5 years by the RIC on their own volition under Section 47 of the Act. And then under Section 49 of the Act, the service provider can initiate the rate review process. So which one is currently taking place? Is it the Section 49 where WASA asked the RIC to review?
I can't say which section of the Act. I say we have been in communication with the RIC. We have provided documentation. It has been a process that, in fact, started, I think the initial, the time that it was done within recent memory would have been in 2007. So it has been going to and fro since then. I can't say under which section.
Mr. Punking, if I may ask, you mentioned, sorry, Member Hussain, we'll come back to you just now, but I just want to ask something in relation to what you are, the response that you are seeking is that in 2007, you said there was a review.
There was a submission by WASA to the RIC.
Right. So so the initiative was made by WASA in 2007. There was a submission from you in 2007.
To my recollection, yes.
Okay. But this current one, based on what Member Hussain is asking, I think he's just trying to clarify whether it's an initiative of the RIC under their 5-year period for the review of tariffs, or is this a specific request from WASA for a review of the tariff?
We have prepared a business plan looking at the way forward with respect to service and the the business model to go with that. And that document has been submitted to our line ministry, and we have shared with the RIC, and there has been an ongoing discussion with respect to format and so on. And that discussion is ongoing at this time.
Member Hussain?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Punkin, can you tell us what date you submitted this business model to the ministry?
I don't have the date offhand, but that could be provided in writing.
Thank you. And based on also we're hearing that there's going to be a restructuring of WASA. And if a new business model has been submitted to the ministry, it means that there's some level of restructuring that is going to happen in terms of WASA's management. Can you confirm to this committee whether or not there is any plan afoot in order to privatize WASA?
Okay, I think there has been a cabinet-appointed subcommittee that has done a review of the authority. And based on the outcome of that review, the way forward will be charted. I think the question that you're asking probably will be better directed to the Ministry of Public Utilities rather than WASA at this time.
Okay, and Mr. Punking, also, there are some of these service centers that have been closed by WASA currently. I think in Couva, there has been a closure of one of the service stations. Are there any plans in order to further reduce the services available to the public?
Okay, the service center in Couva will in fact be services there will stop. And it is based on our review of our customer interaction and our cost-cutting initiatives. What we are looking at as well, coming out of the current modes of interaction, coming out of the pandemic. And so we are looking at alternative mechanisms for interaction with the public. So we are using WhatsApp more, we are using Facebook more, and our web page for interactions for payment and so on, to reduce the personal interaction. To again looking at reducing the possibility of infection in the current scenario.
Okay. And my last question relates to WASA's business sustainability. Can you just quantify, if you can, what is the debt that WASA currently owes, be it local or in terms of foreign debts?
Our current hard debt, I would call it, would be at $4.2 billion, all encompassing.
$4.2 billion.
Correct. And we could get the exact figure and provide that in writing.
Can we have a breakdown? If you can get a breakdown of the debt.
Certainly that could be provided.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Member Hussain, we have two members want to pose questions to WASA. Member Roberts and Member Morris Julian. So I'll ask Member Morris Julian to go first, and then after we have questions from Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to Mr. Poongang. I have a question regarding the level of communication between WASA, Ministry of Local Government, and Ministry of Works when it comes to road repairs. Having experienced first time, brand new road paved, and then WASA comes literally the same day, next day, 2 weeks afterwards. And currently I have a situation on O'Mara Road that has been ongoing for nearly 7 years with regards to, again, the road being dug up for a WASA project. And my concern is the level of communication. Is there any plans to improve this level of communication? For example, the corporation would usually write to say, we're going to pave this road, and then afterwards you will hear something about old pipes or something along that nature. So I'm concerned about the level of communication between WASA, Ministry of Works, and yes, let us add the local government corporation.
Okay, with respect to, you use the word communication. I would perhaps use collaboration rather than communication. We do have a situation currently in Point 14 that goes towards a little more of the collaboration, where a pipeline, it's a high leakage pipe that we are changing out in Point 14. And the Ministry of Works, in fact, they wanted to pave the section of road. And we communicated with them, indicated that we had intent to replace the pipeline. And we did have a delay in getting funding and so on. But that has been addressed, and the pipeline project was scheduled to start. And we have been working with the Point 14 Corporation and with the Ministry of Works with respect to us getting the pipeline installed and the old pipeline decommissioned. And that collaboration will now, when the road is paved, the situation that you described will not or should not occur. What happens in the cases that you described is where paving is being done on a roadway that may have older pipelines. In this case, paving will be done on a section with new pipelines. And once you're mixing the new road surface with old infrastructure beneath, you will have the risk of a leak occurring even after a day, a week, a month after the roadworks have been completed, necessitating that excavation be done on the newly paved surface.
All right, so through you, Mr. Chairman, again, what can we do? Is there anything to improve this form of collaboration communications? Because I know that I have written in the past to WASA informing them that this road is supposed to be done, this will be complete in this year, this month, and there'll be no response, right? And then casually we'll find out from someone, you can go ahead and pave. And then it's almost certain in a few days, something would happen to the very road that you paved, right? I can name several roads that have happened. I'm just asking, is it possible that we could explore a more collaborative effort other than what you just described is all well and good, but it's not the norm.
Agreed. So and it is not the norm. And what can be exchanged is information with respect to our intent to lay a pipe, or from the Ministry of Works or local government of the intent to pave a road, and then we look at if we have a concern with respect to installation of a pipe. I think the bigger problem, though, is where you would see leaks occurring on a pipeline that let's say a particular road has been identified to be paved. We would normally get the information, go in, if there are leaks, address the leaks, and communicate with the implementing agency. Okay, the leaks have been addressed, but as I indicated, the pipe may be an old pipe. Ideally, what should occur is that the development program of one entity follows the other, but the priority, let's say, of a regional corporation to get a particular thoroughfare paved may not be consistent with WASA's intent to try to improve the water supply to a particular community. So we may want to lay a pipe along one road. You may have a desire to pave another, and that's where you get some divergence of the approach. But there is communication. I think it's just the common focus to have a particular road done. If as it happened in Point Fortin, if more could happen like that, certainly that would be the way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Punking. Member Roberts, you can pose your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me assure Minister Maurice Julian, thank you for that observation. All she has to do is go back to the People's Partnership, Kamla Prasad Bisesa playbook with Minister Ganga Singh and Jack Warner, where the Ministry of Works and Transport and WASA would get together and they would go hand in hand. They fix the pipes first, then the roads. So she could go back and look at the cabinet notes of 2011 to 13 to solve that problem. Mr. Poon King, WASA recently, you need to help me understand this. 3 years ago at a Joint Select Committee, WASA said that we are treating water and producing water 7.2 billion let me say it properly, billion gallons of water per month. And when WASA tries to pump this freshly treated potable water out to citizens, approximately 4.1 billion gallons are wasted due to poor piping and leakage and wasted. That was put on the Hansard on the record. 53% of potable water is lost. WASA recently, within the last 2 years, has spent $125 million alone from the IDB. Please tell me, why did we spend this money, close to $1 billion TT dollars, on trying to increase supply when supply was not the issue? Why was that spent on groundwater reservation, groundwater wells, drilling wells, and so on, rather than fixing the distribution network, which is the problem? Kindly explain that for me.
Right. So the solution in terms of the water supply equation, there are two sides: supply and demand, and we need to address both. In some areas, there would be a need for an increase in supply in localized areas. In others, it will be a piping issue. The solution to the water problem is neither to singularly improve production, or for that matter to change out pipes and extend the system. It needs to be a comprehensive approach insofar as looking at the supply side, where we have localized issues in terms of when you look at the population and the volume of water being produced. If we have a localized problem, you need to increase supply. In cases where the pipeline network, whether transmission or distribution, is inadequate, we need to increase that and get the water from where it's available to where it's needed. And then the final part will be when it gets to the customer, insofar as ensuring that customer usage is managed. We would have to look at, and we have been in different areas, pressure management insofar as a part of an overall demand management system to manage pressure in terms of reducing breaks on our pipes and also usage on properties. And then the final part will be the conservation by by the consumer or customer as to how much water they actually use for whatever they need to do.
I'll move on to the next question, sir. But if you have a bucket full of holes, you are telling me that rather than fix the holes, you're going to increase the pressure of the water to fill the holy bucket? I can't understand that. Maybe I'm not intelligent enough. Next question. WASA's objective is to provide the nation with water. It's failing due to, as one of your officials just said, a lack of funding. There are leaks. The infrastructure is archaic. Yet we are seeing decisions being made that could potentially impact employees in the thousands of WASA. We are hearing politicians making claims that WASA is overburdened with its wage bill by 2,000 employees and so on, while WASA has not taken steps to provide its mission, its statement, its use, its whole viability is to provide water. It's failing there, but it seems that workers are now going to be made the scapegoats of WASA's inefficiency. Can you please explain this?
Okay, insofar as the relook at WASA's operations, I think that, as indicated before, Cabinet Subcommittee has done a review, and that report, I think, has been completed. And based on that, we are looking forward to the findings of that committee to inform the way forward. Insofar as what that committee will find, I can't predict or foresee. And based on that, we will determine the way forward.
Is it your assertion here that this committee, because the way I see it, you are WASA, you are the expert, you are knowledgeable, you have the day-to-day information, you know what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what's going on, what are the problems? Is it your assertion that this committee is coming to dictate to you what is going to happen, or have you as WASA provided this committee with a detailed plan, WASA's opinion, the management's opinion on the way forward to ensure water security, water production, water clarity, water purity for the population? Is it the experts who are advising the committee, or a committee of ministers who are not experts going to tell us what is going to happen with our water? What is this process, please?
Right, so WASA has contributed and commented with respect to the concerns, and that will be included in making a determination on the way forward. But WASA has contributed.
Final question. If WASA has contributed, my colleague Saddam Hussein was asking about the possibility of privatization. In any of the recommendations, proposals, analyses, or reports put forward to the committee, has WASA, the experts, advised that committee that privatization of any or all of WASA's functions is an option? Has WASA recommended privatization in any form or fashion to the Cabinet Committee?
Privatization within the water sector is a tool that can be used. The extent to which you use it, that needs to be determined. WASA currently has a form of privatization in that not all the services that WASA uses do we have the resources in-house. So we do have a private sector involvement at present. Insofar as whether that increases or decreases, again, within some areas it may need to increase, and in others it may decrease. But that evolves as we go along.
Let me be a little bit more specific, because you have a private sector entity and in utilization in functions of maintenance and contracting and so on. I'm talking about the Trinidad and Tobago water supply, control of the water supply, effects of the water supply, distribution of the water supply. Has WASA recommended to the committee, as privatization is a tool that they use a jackhammer of privatization to impact the nation's water supply. Is that anywhere in WASA's recommendation?
Not as an overall tool, as I indicated, it is something that is used in different segments of the water sector. So where appropriate, it can be used, but not as an overall model.
Okay, thank you.
Where is it appropriate? In what areas do you believe, and have you recommended that it is appropriate?
WASA has not made a recommendation on privatization going forward. Where it can be applied, as I say, currently, we do utilize external resources to WASA in water trucking, in backhoes, and so on. It can also be applied in non-revenue water reduction and other areas which we currently don't use, but that can be considered.
Mr. Chairman, I hand over now. I don't want to dominate or monopolize our water supply, but I put the nation on alert that privatization may be coming. So I hope the people are listening.
Thank you, Member Roberts. I was about to intervene, but so I'm glad we are handing over. We hand over to Mr. Member Richards. Member Richards, you with us? You have a question?
Yes, I'm here, Chairman. Do you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you. Please proceed.
Yes, I'm here. All right. It's a follow-up question basically to Member Maurice Julian. When the CEO of WASA, Mr. Punking, spoke about the project in Point Fortin, as a member of Parliament for Point Fortin, I would have him know that I also was a part of that team that WASA has been liaising with. He didn't mention that, maybe he forgot. Added to that, at some of those meetings, a couple of things stood out. One, they started a couple of weeks late after the start date. So with regards to his communication, as what our member Maurice Julian was alluding to, they need to actually get that going. Because if you say Monday, then you need to have things in place for Monday. It could never be 3 or 4 Mondays down the line after you said Monday. And added to that, the end date of that project is supposed to be the 8th of December. So as a member of Parliament, I informed the constituents that the project will finish on the 10th. So I gave them a 2-day grace period. So now today is the 17th, and we're still midway through the project. Now, needless to say, the road is in a terrible condition, and I have been getting complaints left, right, and center. So my biggest issue is, and the issue that the constituents would have had over the last few weeks, is the efficiency of WASA. Because at the initial meetings, they were supposed to start at 9 o'clock in the morning and finish 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock. But now we see a trend where 9 o'clock, no one is there. 10 o'clock, they would gather. 12 o'clock, work would start, and by 2 o'clock, it's rain. So I want to ask the CEO, what is going forward now? What is the plan for increasing the efficiency of WASA, especially with regards to that Point Fortin project? And what can we look forward? Sorry, when can we look forward to that, a completion date for that project, right? And also, what is going to happen in terms of the repairs for the roads? Thank you.
Okay, so with respect to the getting the work finished, well, first of all, let me apologize to MP Richards. He was, in fact, instrumental in the coordination between WASA and the Point Fortin Corporation. And so my apologies in that regard. So, but going forward, so far as getting the work finished, we have had hiccups. The member did indicate rainfall and so on affecting and delaying. We will be looking at the project And we did have a date of, or as indicated, of December 10th. I know that the pipe laying along the section where we had a concern that we wanted to complete, the actual pipe laying is completed. I think we are doing service connections at this time. And the intent is to have the works finished by the end of this week. So that we could, so we're looking at tomorrow and probably at latest on Monday to have everything finished and to have a temporary surface put on the road. And then thereafter to work with the Ministry of Works to have a final surface put on.
Okay, Mr. Poon-King, thank you. Just one or two questions again for you. Your capacity as CEO of WASA. In your previous response to the committee, and particularly to questions regarding the Salcott, now you indicated that your Salcott bill is approximately $6 million per month. And I wanted to ask the question in terms of the consumers that are supplied with the Salcott water, based on the amount of monies that you pay, that's $6 billion a month. What revenue WASA generates from its customers that is supplied with the Salcott water? Approximately.
Okay. I'll have to do quick maths in my head, but I could provide that in writing. But the water from the Salcott goes to the Point Lisas Industrial Estate, and the figure there is of the order of 25 million TT or thereabouts, I think. So but I'll get the exact figure per month. And from there, the water beyond that goes to the domestic system, and going to the domestic system, our domestic system is not metered, and that is based on the ATV of properties and so on. So to say revenue generated specifically from water in the Salcott, it would be confined to the Point Lisas Industrial Estate, and we could provide that information over a 12-month period for the committee.
Yeah, but okay, I note you provide in writing some details, but overall, Mr. Poon-King, are we purchasing water at a higher price than what we are collecting, the revenues that we are collecting to the consumers? Is there a deficit situation with regards to water purchase from the Salcott?
There would be a deficit in that the Salcott plant produces around 40 million gallons of water a day, and probably 50 to 55% of that would go out onto the domestic system, with the balance being within Point Lisas, and the fee within Point Lisas would cover the production of the water that is consumed in Point Lisas. But when water goes out, even if it goes to a commercial entity outside of the industrial estate, the rate is $3.50 per cubic meter. Within the industrial estate, it's $12 per cubic meter. And so once you go beyond, and we consider that we are paying $1, which is $6.80. So once it leaves the estate, we operate at a deficit, whether it's a commercial, industrial, or domestic customer.
Okay, so the supply within the estate is feasible. It's justifiable.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. In terms of the number of industries that have been mothballed or shut down within the Point Lisas area, which is, I think, the last count I'm aware of is seven such industries, plants, or could be more. So yeah, 10. I'm being advised by Member Roberts. What impact is that having on the situation with this Salcott and the reduced revenues from these industries? what position is that putting WASA in?
Right. So there would be a deficit in terms of our revenue, our collection of money from the industrial estate. The additional water that would previously have been consumed by, let's say, an ArcelorMittal, that water now becomes available for going out onto the domestic system to go to other areas. But there's not necessarily a commensurate increase in collection of money from those areas. So we would be collecting less money overall with the closure of any plant in Point Lisas.
Okay, so based on your projections for the coming years, it doesn't seem, it's not an optimistic projection at all regarding revenues from the Point Lisas industrial estate.
Correct. So we continue to monitor the plants, and I think the plants are driven by the economies, not only of Trinidad but others. And given the current downturn, they have reduced production in some cases, either stopped altogether or reduced their production. So we continue to monitor and look at to see how best we can utilize that water to improve the service to the domestic customer. But that certainly the reduction in rates at Point Lisas will be significant in terms of our collection profile.
All right, Member Hussein has a question, but before you go on, before you ask a question, Member Hussein, just for me to close off on this accord. From what we understand from previous responses, Mr. Poon-King, the DISALCOT contract has been extended to the year 2039. Is that true? Is that accurate?
2036.
2036. Yeah. And we are still under the obligations to take that 40 million gallons a day. That is a must under the contract.
So the contract is for 40 million gallons a day until 2036. Yes.
Okay. Member Hussein.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a very short question. Mr. Poon-King, you had alluded earlier on to the fact that the water rates are based on the ATV, which is the annual taxable value of the property. Can you just confirm whether or not with the introduction of the property tax, which uses the same annual taxable value, whether or not that also would impact on the rates that WASA would charge to consumers?
Right. So currently, as I indicated, it is linked to the taxable value, and if the property tax or the property law is amended, our rates would be amended accordingly. Alternatively to that, you'll have the situation where in some cases some customers are metered, and the meter rate would apply in such cases.
Okay. So the new property tax value will affect the WASA rates.
It will apply, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Poon-King, one final question for you. Would you just please update the committee with regards to the IDB initiative that was mentioned in your previous responses to us?
Okay, the IDB intervention, we had two loans. One was loan 2890 and one was loan 2600. The loan 2600, the funding from that was utilized in terms of projects to do a wastewater project in southwest Tobago. So that project has been completed. Another project being funded under the loan 2600 is the works at the Trinidad wastewater plant. Those works are ongoing. And under loan 2890, there were two components: construction of a new plant at Malabar in East Trinidad, and extension of the collection system. That project has been completed. And the last component is under 2890, is the construction of the San Fernando wastewater plant. And that was delayed and is ongoing still at this time. And that project, I'd say it's about 90% to 91% complete. and we are looking towards a completion during 2021 of that project.
All right, and before I go to Member Hussein, in terms of the tariff review that is being done currently, does that include proposed increases in the wastewater rates as well, bearing in mind these extensive wastewater works that WASA has undertaken?
Well, I say the business, we've done a business plan, and that we would be in further communication with our line ministry, and then towards the RIC. I think the proposal at this time suggests that the wastewater rate that currently applies going forward, and that is that 50% of the water rate would be applied as a wastewater rate.
Okay, thank you. Member Hussein?
Chairman, I have no more questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the Ministry of Public Utilities. Any member has any? Before we do so, Mr. Poon King, there's a question from the public that has come through. The question from the public is that does WASA have any set standards for its in-house staff and contractors in respect of the resurfacing of roads? And if yes, what mechanism does WASA have in place to ensure that these standards are met? This is a question from the public.
Right, so in response to that question, yes, we do have standards. And part of the collaboration with the RIC is towards the formalization of those standards. And it will be a standard under the regulation, so that will form part and parcel of the consideration by the RIC in terms of the review of the authorities' operations, tariff and operation.
Right. The question also included what mechanisms does WASA have in place right now to ensure that this doesn't met?
Okay. With
regards to reinstatement of roads.
Right. So the current the standard that the RIC has, and we will be adopting on an ongoing basis moving forward, is within 2 days we are required to have the temporary surface restored, and thereafter permanent restoration within 7 days. I think we need to acknowledge, and WASA acknowledges, that we have not been meeting that standard. And in the past, we have not had, for example, road restoration crews dedicated to that particular activity. That has changed, where we have crews now assigned to road restoration. So we are putting more emphasis on that towards having the restoration done following the repair of pipelines.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any questions for the Ministry of Public Utilities from any member? Yeah, Member Hussein.
Thank you, Chair. I know Mr. Poon King told me that his department may not have knowledge of this, but I think I could pose it out to the Ministry of Public Utilities. Is there any plan by the government to privatize WASA?
Thank you for the question, member. As Mr. Punkin would have indicated.
Chair, I do think I'm hearing properly.
Mr. Duke, we're not hearing you too clearly.
I'm actually hearing you fine. I'm not too sure what is on my end, but
no, we are hearing you a lot better now.
Better.
All right, okay. All right, as Mr. Punking would have indicated earlier, member, and thank you for the question, the cabinet set up a subcommittee to review the operations of WASA and to devise strategies for enabling the authority to deliver on its mandate. Now, that committee would have completed its work. It would have had submissions and contributions from many stakeholders, and that report was delivered to the Honorable Prime Minister last Friday. Of course, moving forward, the recommendations of that committee have to be accepted or not, or varied, or by an approved cabinet. And therefore, at this point in time, I cannot say to you that I know of any attempts to privatize WASA, because I don't, right? We await feedback on the report of the committee in order to guide us on the way forward.
So you can confirm to this committee that the Ministry of Public Utilities made no recommendation to the cabinet that there's any need to privatize WASA.
I'm not certain I understand that question.
So you can confirm as Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Utilities that you have made no recommendation to privatize WASA, because you said that you know no plan to privatize WASA.
Remember, I was saying, just to jump in here, I think what Ms. Duke indicated was that there was a subcommittee of cabinet, a report was done, it was delivered, and they await any direction.
No, I understand. Remember, right, I understand all of that, I ask a direct question, whether or not there was a recommendation by the ministry to privatize WASA or not.
So then what you're asking for is what the ministry would have recommended in the report that has not yet been made public. Because
I'm just asking for one recommendation, just one.
I know you're asking for one, but what I'm telling you is that the report has been done. It is where it needs to be. And there's a process to take place. And I think that's what she was indicating. So I'm indicating to you now that what you're asking for might be a little bit premature.
But I don't think
members,
evidence members.
Please, members, could I just intervene at this point in time? The question has been posed to Ms. Duke. Ms. Duke is free to decline to answer the question if it puts her in any in a position if she's not in a position to answer.
Now, Chairman, I think I would have said earlier that the committee received contributions from several stakeholders. So I do not know if that is the context in which the member is asking the question. I would just say in response that the committee was headed by the Minister of Public Utilities. That was the chairman of the committee. And I am sure that the minister would have added his own contributions to the report. The committee was supported by the Ministry of Public Utilities in respect of housing the secretariat to the committee. So as to speak to the members' question as to whether the ministry itself would have made such a recommendation, I do not believe that there would have been any opening for the ministry to act in such a manner. That's my response.
Right. I think we will take that response because I know that the issue of WASA is integral to water security as well. It is a major player in the whole question of water security. But in terms of whether or not the report that is before the cabinet, whether the acting permanent secretary of the Ministry of Public Utilities, whether or not she can say whether privatization of WASA is contained within that report or not, I think it's moving away from we're straying from the objectives of the inquiry, which I I did mention the objectives of the inquiry at the very beginning. And to pursue this particular question of the privatization of WASA in the context of what is before the report that was done and what is before the cabinet, I think we are moving away from that. So I would, the acting secretary has given a response, and I would leave it at that. Okay. What I would like to ask you, Member Roberts, we are not hearing you. Member Roberts, we are not hearing you. Member Roberts, your mic is muted. We are not hearing you. Your mic is muted.
Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I am certain that the permanent secretary did not need an attorney, so I don't know why Member De Freitas had to jump in. What is clear, we understand that the permanent secretary has no authority to approve. That lies with the cabinet. However, what we are here to know is, because this cabinet, Mr. De Freitas, member, has a history of doing its own thing. Petrotrin was not recommended to be shut down. The board did not recommend it to be shut down. It is shut down. So all we are asking is...
Member Roberts, we are really straying away from
this inquiry, and I suggest that we would move on.
Chairman, this is water security. If they sell our water, we will not be secure.
References to Petrotrin and all of those things, I don't think it's applicable here right now.
No, sir. I may just use that to make a point. We are asking if the Ministry of Public Utilities, which is an expert, if in their recommendations to the cabinet, they recommended privatization as a possibility. If they did not, when the cabinet approves something and we hear privatization, we would know that it came wholly and solely from the cabinet. That's the key point.
Well, the purpose of this inquiry is really not to know that particular, Mr. Roberts. I don't agree with you on that. The acting permanent secretary has answered, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to ask a question of the
no problem. I just find Mr. De Freitas getting nervous. Nervous.
Okay. Madam Permanent Secretary, I would like to come back to the question of the integrated water resources management policy, because I do know the last time we spoke to you, you had indicated that it had gone to Parliament and you were waiting further directives from the cabinet. Do you have any update for us regarding the IWRM?
Chairman, I do recall the conversation about the IWRM, and we spoke to it at length in the previous meeting. And you would recall that we said at that time that it was at cabinet and we had not received a response. Well, since then, the last administration went out, so that note was returned to us. One of the things that we discussed at the last meeting was the whole issue of the regulator being inside of the operator, right? And whether the ministry thought it would not be better to separate the regulator from the operator so that we can have better oversight concerning the water resources and the watersheds and that sort of thing. So that we have the opportunity now, and I have again to refer to that report that has gone to cabinet, because that has gone to the Prime Minister, excuse me, because on that hinges a number of things, right? As I said, it was to review the operations of WASA. So it means that whatever decision is taken impacts on all aspects of the operation of WASA, including whether there will now be an acceptance of separating the regulator from the operator. So we are still in a situation where we have to wait a bit longer in order to have the decision of cabinet so that we can advance the policy that we would have put before cabinet previously, as well as whether there's a separate entity that deals with the regulating as opposed to the operating, which we discussed on the last occasion, would be the optimum situation to have. So we are still, waiting, but this time because of this report.
Okay, because we do have the situation where WASA is the service provider, service regulator. Ministry of Public Utilities is the policy regulator. The RIC is the economic regulator. The EMA is the environmental regulator. The Water Resources Agency is the resource regulator. Yeah. All separate entities dealing with the issue of water security. And I know, yes, WASA and its key role in the water security. But based on all the responses we have gotten when we consider the watershed management, the effects of pollution, agricultural runoff, and the contamination of water that goes for treatment for potable sources and everything. And then we have signed on to the multilateral agreements, international agreements, particularly Vision 2030, mentions about the integrated management approach to water security. And it's just that in the context of it all, whilst focus is on WASA, the adoption of this integrated water resources management policy, to me, as chair of this committee, seems to be a vital aspect of the overall question of water security. And are you saying that that it has been resubmitted to Cabinet for consideration? Because when I looked at the fiscal measures, the budgetary allocations for this particular piece of, for the implementation of this policy, I think the budget allocation is rather minimal. I think it's just around $500,000. So I was just wondering whether that would be adequate to really initiate this sort of work that is needed to go towards the implementation of this policy.
Chair, I will ask the VPS to give some perspective on the question you posed.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your observation is correct. The amount that we have received as an allocation for the water resources management is $500,000, and we anticipate that that will be able to finance the beginning of the process. But because we did not have at that time of preparing the budget a definitive position of the cabinet, a decision on that that recommendation that was made, we don't as yet know. We know that the separation is something that we have recommended, but what will be the form of that separation, what will emerge out of that separation, we have not yet had a decision on that. So yes, it will initiate some of the work related to the separation, but the extent of the funding required will be determined by what is the model we select for that separation to take the form of.
Okay, great, thank you. Any member has any more questions for the Ministry of Public Utilities? All right, well, we have been through the four entities. I think Member Roberts wanted to ask one more question of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Member Roberts, are you there? Yeah, you have to unmute. You have to unmute your mic, Member Roberts. You had one more question for the.
I keep being muted. Let me see. Oh, it had to do with climate change. It's not for the ministry. I think there was a climatologist. Which ministry was that? The planning and development.
Mr. Kerr, yeah. Chief climatologist, Mr. Kerr from the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Just some information. I would like him to define for us what is considered a drought and give us probably the 10-year annual rainfall average for Trinidad and Tobago, and let us know in any one of those years, have we ever qualified as being in a drought?
Thank you, member. Good evening again to everyone. Chair, the question is a broad question. A drought, there are various types of droughts. And overall, it's a period of very low rainfall relative to some normal. And we can contextualize that into what we know as a meteorological drought, an agricultural drought, a hydrological drought, and a socioeconomic drought. So it depends on different factors. It depends on time frames as well. And for us, we have had, from a meteorological perspective, we have had meteorological droughts occurring in Trinidad and Tobago over the last 10 years, but more so during the dry season, and more often than not, short-lived in terms of duration, perhaps up to 3 months. But we are experiencing, a number of droughts have been experienced. We had one in 2010, we had another in 2016, and last year we had a very excessive dry period during the dry season that did not reach the threshold because we operate based on scientific principles where we quantify a drought based on something called a standardized precipitation index, meaning that when the rainfall amounts deviate from the normal by one standard deviation, so to speak. And we have had these events occurring. From a climate change perspective, these events are likely to get more frequent for small islands like Trinidad and Tobago, but we don't have to wait on climate change. From a climate variability perspective alone, we know for a fact that whenever there is an El Nino event, we in Trinidad and Tobago tend to get drier, much drier, including up to drought conditions, especially late in the wet season into the dry season. And that has occurred during those 3 years that I have mentioned and occurred in quick time, meaning 2010, 2016, 2019. And over time, we have experienced these. We know for a fact as well that I know Member Roberts indicated that climate change is down the road. I want to alert the community too and the committee that we are experiencing climate change and it is not down the road. Some of these events, they will occur as the droughts have occurred because of natural climate variability, but are made worse because of climate change. So we have experienced droughts. Some of these have impacted the agricultural sector and some have impacted the water sector. So yes, we have experienced droughts in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerr. Member Roberts?
Remember the question for the Deputy PS of the Ministry of Rural and Local Development.
Before you move on, Member Roberts, we have a procedural issue that I have to address. We no longer have a quorum for the meeting because the members of the lower house are no longer with us. That's Member Hussein and Minister Morris Julian. So unfortunately, I would have to ask members, I would have to adjourn the hearing, and I would have to ask members, not to preempt your question in any way, Member Roberts, but I'll have to ask you and any other members who have any questions for the entities present today to please submit them in writing to the Secretariat, and these questions would be forwarded to the respective entity. So without a quorum, I have to adjourn the meeting. I would not be able to invite any closing comments from our entities, which is a normal procedure. But I would really like to thank everyone, all of the representatives from the entities who have joined us today. Thank you very much for your time and for the responses given. And we look forward to your future cooperation through any written questions that the committee may have in the future. I would like to thank all members of the committee for attending our hearing today. And I would like to thank our listening and viewing audience who listened on the ParlView channel and the 105.5 FM. Thank you very much for your public interaction. We did get one or two questions from the public, which was posed to the representatives. And in closing, I would really like to extend our thanks on behalf of the committee and also the representatives to the Secretariat of the Parliament for this Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure. Secretary Ms. Candace Skerritt and assisted by Mr. Johnson Greenwich, our research assistant Ms. Gokul, and all the technical team who made this broadcast possible. Thank you. I would declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr.
God
Chair.
bless. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mr.
Merry Christmas, Senator Roberts.
Mr. Chair, thank you for letting Mr. Roberts know that climate change is not down the future, but is here with us.
I know, thanks.
I agree with that. I just think we need to fix the leaks first. I'm a climate man. I'm an environmentalist. But we need to fix the leaks first. We can do it, if we intelligent.